Hey guys, and this is part 2 of my sewing basics and thrift flip hacks series. So in this video, I'll be talking about some thrift flip hacks that I use all the time. They're my go-to when trying to alter stuff that doesn't fit me quite right or I want to DIY. So that includes sewing a dart, sewing an invisible stitch by hand, and how to stitch in the waistband of a dress without too much sewing. And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, go on over to part 1. In that video, I talked about some sewing basics and techniques that I use when sewing with a sewing machine or when sewing by hand. So if you want to get more comfortable sewing, that video is for you. So first, I'm going to show you guys how to take in the waistband of an item that might be too big on you. I found this old skirt in my parents' closet that is too big around my waist. First, you'll want to try on the item to see how much you want to take in. I do this by pinching the loose fabric together and measuring how much that is. Mine was about an inch of extra fabric. Take off the item and flip it all inside out. You'll want to sew your dart on the side of the item or the back so it's not noticeable. I'll be sewing it on the side of the skirt since there's a zipper on the back that I don't want to mess up. I'm using my ruler to measure an inch off the waistband. You can use a marker or pins to mark this measurement. To sew a dart, you want to sew a triangle. This brings in the waistband but not the entire skirt, so it leaves room for your hips. The length of your dart will depend on how much you want to take in. The longer your dart is, the more you'll take in and the smaller your item will get. Once it's pinned, take it over to the sewing machine. While it is still inside out, sew along the pins. When coming to the end of the dart, you want to integrate your seam with the original seam of the item. This allows it all to be blended together so your dart isn't noticeable. Do this by slowly turning your fabric so that the needle aligns with the item's original seam. Sew straight along the original seam a few times before you backstitch. Once you're done sewing, try it on. I always recommend trying the item on before cutting off the extra fabric, just in case it ended up being a little too tight. Once you know that it fits you correctly, you can go ahead and cut off the extra fabric. And now you have yourself an improved and fitted item. Sewing a dart takes practice, but it's such a simple way to make loose pants or skirts a little bit more fitting. So tip number 2 is sewing an invisible stitch by hand. This can be used for any item, so if you want to sew a new hem on a skirt but you don't have a sewing machine, this is a really simple way to hand sew a new stitch without it being shown on the outside of the fabric. So with an invisible stitch, like the name suggests, you cannot see the stitching from the outside of the fabric. So it's a really simple way to get that clean finish that's on new clothing. To sew an invisible stitch, you want to fold up your seam. So imagine the strap piece of fabric is a skirt that I wish to hem about 1.5 inches. I'm going to fold up that hem and pin it in place. You then want to grab your threaded needle. To start the stitch, you want to create a knot to keep it all in place. Do this by pulling your needle through the folded piece of fabric and make a knot. Again, only through the hem, like the folded piece of fabric, not the outside. Once you knotted the stitch, you'll want to grab a tiny piece of the outside fabric. Try to grab as little as possible. Then pull your needle up and through the folded part. Repeat this over and over, only grabbing a tiny piece of the actual skirt. So most of the thread will be sewn on the seam itself. This will make sure that the seam isn't noticeable from the front and when you're wearing it. We interrupt this regularly scheduled program for a rant by Shauna Ye as she sews. I thought I would share a little bit about why I started thrift flipping and kind of how I got into that, just in case anybody was curious, not that anybody asked. Yeah, so I grew up going to thrift stores. My mom would take me all the time, and it was so fun because the things weren't that expensive, so she would be like, Shauna, get whatever you want, get whatever shirt you want, get anything you want, and I would just go ham. I remember I found Converse one time there, and I thought, like, I struck gold. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a thrift queen, like, look at these Converse that I found. They were like 3 sizes too big, but I convinced my mom to get them for me, and I wore them all the time. But then, you know, high school came around and thrifting wasn't cool. Like, everybody was like, oh, you go to the thrift store, like, you must be poor, like, you can't afford new clothes. So I started shopping at the mall all the time. I had a half-day schedule my senior year of high school, so I would leave at lunch with my friend and we would just go to the mall and spend so much money and buy all these new clothes that we didn't need or anything, but we just wanted to, and it was fun, and it was kind of like the thing to do in high school in my small suburban Maryland town. There wasn't anything to do but shop or eat, so that's what we did. And then I took AP Environmental Science my senior year of high school, and my teacher, she was like the reincarnation of Miss Frizzle from Magic School Bus. She was quirky, she had frizzy hair, and she was just like in love with the environment. She taught me so much about how fast fashion isn't good for our earth and all this stuff about pollution and trash and climate change, and it really opened my eyes to like how much our earth is suffering and how much our world is suffering and what that really meant as consequences for our generation and our kids' generation. So that was like the first time I really learned about making smart decisions and being a smart consumer. Then I went to college, and I go to college in LA. So everybody there, you know, vegetarian, really earthy, loves the environment, or seems to at least online. And I became vegetarian, and I watched all these documentaries about the food industry, about the fashion industry, and how it was horrible for the earth. And I decided that I wanted to do at least what I could to make the earth better and healthier and have a better environment. Most of the things that I've bought in the past like 9 months to a year have been from a thrift store or Depop. And that's kind of when I got into thrift flipping. I got into thrifting more again, and I would go to all these big LA thrift stores, and of course they have so much stuff and like it's all so nice. And that's kind of when I unleashed my creative side and started like flipping these items into stuff that I saw online at Princess Polly, at Urban Outfitters, but I didn't want to support those businesses and their unsustainable acts. So I think thrifting and thrift flipping is super fun. You're able to help the environment and like do your little part in protecting our home. And it might not seem like that much, but for me, it's, you know, living by what I believe in, and I really want to be more sustainable and make smart decisions and not be just a consumer. But thrifting allows me to, you know, still buy new clothes because I love clothes, but do that in a more sustainable way. So that was my little rant on why I love thrifting, and I think everybody should do it. And everybody should, you know, especially during quarantine, we have all this time, and I'm so lucky to be able to be at home. Like, I am not working, and I just finished school, so I think now that I just want to, you know, learn some new sewing techniques, and once the thrift store is open, I'm going ham, and watch out because I'm gonna have a whole new wardrobe of thrift thrifted clothes. And now back to your regularly scheduled program. Thank you. Once you finish sewing, you'll have something that looks like this from the back. Remember, it's better to use a color thread that matches the fabric, but I used black so you could see it on camera. And in the front, you can barely see the thread, and it would look even less noticeable with white thread. An invisible stitch is such a simple way to hem an item that's a little bit too long when you don't have a sewing machine. This last little hack is something I do all the time when the waist of a skirt is just a little bit unflattering. I DIY'd this mini summer dress in my recent TikTok, but I wanted the waist to be a little bit more tighter, but still have the rest of the dress be loose. What I did was use extra fabric from the dress to create 2 long ties. You could also do this by using ribbon if you don't have extra fabric. You want to find the waist area of the dress. My dress had a seam there, so I'm just using that as reference, but you could try on the dress and mark the spot with a safety pin. You then want to pin your fabric or ribbon to the sides of the dress and sew. Make sure the ties are lined up to one another. Sew it on securely by sewing back and forth a few times because you want to make sure that it's really sewn on there since you'll be pulling and tying at it. Then you have these 2 ties on the side of your dress which you can pull together to snatch the waist in. I do this a lot with thrifted items to create a more defined silhouette and a more modern fit. Okay, that's all for today's video. I hope that these tips inspire you to sew, do some thrift flipping, and really get creative and create your own things. If you're a beginner at sewing, I would just say keep practicing, keep trying. It's not going to be perfect the first time, but before you know it, you'll be a pro in making your own dope pieces. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!